Hello and welcome everybody. This is Taco Movie Talks. It is week 11, and as you can see, we are celebrating Akira Kurosawa week, and I am brought to you here with a very special guest. It is Guillermo, aka G do DQ on Letterbox. I found Guillermo browsing Reddit on movie subreddits and saw a really awesome piece about Stalker on Taste of Cinema and got to chatting with him and found out he also writes for Fan Cred as well. And Guillermo, if you wouldn't mind just going into your background a little bit, how you began to, evolve your love for cinema and also began writing articles about cinema.
Hi, Taka. Thank you for having me. There's much to delve into when it comes to our video, the next ones that we're going to discuss, and I'm very excited to be here. First of all, I'm a certified film junkie based in Madrid, Spain, who for the past year and a half has been writing commission lists and retrospective features on practically every director that I've ever cared for. And I have published work at both Taste of Cinema, where I write various listicles, and Film Cred, where I focus on retrospective films of the past. And one thing that Americans should do is count their blessings when it comes to film distribution rights, because any other country gets the short end of the stick when it comes to everything that is outside your usual commercial fare. And for example, in Spain, you have no choice but to wait a few extra months if you want to watch the next big tentpole film. And if you're not as patient as is in my case, you have no option but to sail the seven seas and hunt down obscure films through alternative means. I live in a big city, so we do get some art house cinemas that you have to keep an eye out for limited screenings, but they're kind of a blink it and you miss it type of deal. And I have had the chance of watching Mulholland Drive, Fargo, Fallen Angels, a few Kurosawa films too on the big screen, which is neat.
Ooh.
But for the most part, the theatrical landscape is pretty grim right here.
Yeah, and I think that would be pretty surprising for a lot of the viewers, especially people within the United States and maybe even Canada. Um, that not only there's a little bit of a delay on newer films, but even the art house not being super duper accessible because I don't know. I think, and it's probably a maybe an ignorant foreign perspective, but I would think, places like Spain would really lean into the art house kind of genre, you know?
Yeah, to that point, I do have to say that the tide is turning, and my generation, the younger generation, they're trying to slowly broaden the horizons, and there you can see a change of mindset of people that with letterbox, with the English proficiency level going up, the accessibility of internet that has kind of opened the floodgates for us to embrace all kinds of films. And there's still a lot of a stigma attached to foreign film for the sole reason that every film is dubbed here. And
Mm.
it's completely cringe-worthy, and I've been a radical anti-dub staunch. Um, yeah, I've been hating the dubbed film landscape here for all my life, but the tide is turning, and people are starting to open up to foreign film. I think I have to give a lot of credit to the Parasite craze of
Mm.
2019, when back when it swept the every major award. And I think a lot of young viewers, including myself, hopped on the bandwagon of trying to branch out beyond Hollywood staples. And I think for most of us Westerners and every white film buff trying to take their natural next step beyond that, Kurosawa is a great choice. And in that regard, I think he functions something like a gateway to the wonders of world cinema, almost like rites of passages, where you cannot be a true bona fide film buff if you haven't seen a Kurosawa film. I don't think if you agree with that.
I think you're really limiting yourself if you don't watch Akira Kurosawa, because and this is a conversation that me and you had, and you brought up some really, really cool points about this that I would love for you to dive into. But he is probably one of the most accessible uh, Eastern directors in that I think you compared him to almost Spielberg esque, in that I think a lot of fans trying foreign films for the same time would be able to truly enjoy him.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think that for the main reason that he's an Eastern director, most people tend to put him on the same basket as Bergman, Tarkovsky, Lynch. And in hindsight, I'd argue that he falls closer to the directors of that ilk. And the notion that he's some highbrow, esoteric filmmaker is completely unfounded. He has universal themes that everyone from every background can enjoy. And I remember that my first experience with Kurosawa was back when I was a college freshman, and I wouldn't say it was love at first sight. However, I remember watching the one-two punch of Yojimbo and
Mhm.
Senjuro, and afterwards I was fully on board. I don't know if you had that adaptation period, but for me it was pretty easy to be on board with him.
That's so funny that you mentioned that, because the first film I watched, I appreciated. It was Throne of Blood, but the first Kurosawa film that I did fall in love with and really gained a huge appreciation for the style was Yojimba as well. So we have that in common.
Yeah, I think, and there's a funny aspect to Kurosawa that uh, people may not know, that he's the rare case of a guy who is arguably more respected overseas than in his own turf. And he back even at the height of his powers, he was a bit frowned upon by his own countrymen for being too Western for their taste. And obviously, in hindsight, that seems like an unreal criticism, and he's one of the, if not the most revered Japanese filmmaker ever. But back in the day, Japanese people regarded Yasujiro Ozu, Mizoguchi, Kobayashi as those that captured the true Japanese DNA in their films. And by the 70s came around, he was deemed too old fashioned and out of touch, and he basically had to exile and seek financing, which sounds crazy uh, looking back in 2022. But here was the basically the man that put Japanese cinema on the map, and he had to go abroad and seek financing elsewhere because nobody cared about his films. They thought he gambled too much and he went overboard with budgets, and he was not as appreciated in his homeland than he was everywhere else, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, certainly, and I think I had saw this online and you brought it up when we talked on the phone like a couple weeks ago, but um, like Hollywood directors, like George Lucas and was it James Cameron had to
Yeah,
finance his
yeah,
films?
George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola,
Oh wow.
who were basically diehard fans by that point, they financed Kagamusha and Run, which are two of the great culminations of his career back in the 80s. And they basically put their own out of their own pocket, and he almost killed himself um, because he didn't see any future on Japanese cinema, and he didn't see any future in his own career. So it's kind of poignant that he had a huge comeback and had a great swan song to put an end to his career on a great note, but that was never a given thing. So, but the thing that makes me appreciate the legacy of Kurosawa is that although there's a truth in that he cribbed from John Ford westerns, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, and many Western pop culture icons, probably I'd argue that that's one of the main reasons he was so acclaimed in the first place. That he was a trendsetter in every genre he tackled, and it kind of comes full circle that he was inspired by masters of the past, and then in turn he inspired a whole bunch of American directors and even film film structure as we know it. So it kind of comes full circle. His whole legacy as a trendsetter.
Yeah, that's so neat you bring that up and um I think and you would probably agree with this that his inspirations is probably a big reason why he was very accessible to Western audiences and that why it kind of went full circle, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously you put yourself in the imagine Sergio Leone watching Jimbo and adapting it to his what would be the Dollars trilogy with that practically gave Clint Eastwood a career, and George Lucas watching The Hidden Fortress and noticing certain thematic fabric that he would readapt into a little indie film called Star Wars. and and you're right, and you truly hit the nail on the head when you say that everyone from every background, every country, can dive into his films with any preconceived notion about what he's about and enjoy them because they're not highbrow uh, films that require a deep understanding of the form, and that's his biggest strength, and also probably the reason he was a bit underrated on his own turf.
Let me ask you just two questions before we start to dive into the movies that we both saw. They're two absolutely phenomenal Akira Kurosawa movies. It is Ikiru and Seven Samurai. But what I would like to ask you is because you definitely have a very unique perspective. What country, I guess, country foreign to you, do you I guess, gravitate towards the most or like more as far as foreign films? And then, what would you consider to be like your top director, and where does Akira Kurosawa fall within your top and favorite directors?
Right. So obviously, even though I'm on the other side of the world, I think that anyone who watches films considers American films as anything but foreign films. So, considering that, I do think that the two main um, forces in terms of countries that have had a complete output throughout the decades are France and Japan, and no other country beyond the United States touch that length of masterpieces and number of directors that are revered to this day. But I do think that there's a lot of great films and great directors from every point in the world. You can go to Sweden and you have Bergman. You
Mm.
can go to Taiwan. I love Edward Young films. I discovered him last year and uh, it knocked my socks off. I also love Wong Kar Wai, who is based in Hong Kong and has a lot of both Western and Eastern inspirations. And yeah, in Spain, as I said, there's a bit of a stigma still attached to Eastern pop culture, where anime seems to be the only mainstream uh, thing that has leaked into our collective consciousness. So a lot of great films that I have among my all-time favorites go practically unnoticed. And in terms of where Kurosawa ties into my director's pantheon, I'd say, and this is very tough because call me another day and he can crack the top five. But in good conscience, I have to say that he falls somewhere between the eighth and 10th spot on my personal list.
Wow, and you definitely have a very rich and expansive kind of film background. So I think that's certainly saying something. And like you said, I think there could be a day probably where you watch one of his movies and you could feel like, you know what, he's one of my, top five favorite.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. I feel guilty when ranking masters of this caliber because if you're not putting him on the top five, you have to everyone whatever you settle for, you are leaving out amazing body of works
Hmm.
that I deeply adore. And in terms of if I had to give out my top five directors that I always go back to and I never grow out of their films. I think I should mention PTA, Paul Thomas Anderson,
Mm.
and the Coen brothers too, which I binged their work in the past few years and fell in love completely. So those would join Wong Kar Wai and probably David Lynch too is up there as my all-time pantheon of great filmmakers.
Definitely legends of the industry there. Let's dive into Ikiru first, and I'll try to sum it up as there's a man who kind of works for the government. It's very bureaucratical work that he does, and he notices stomach issues and finds out not quite directly from the doctor, but actually from another another patient in the waiting room that if they say this to you, it's very likely that it's stomach cancer and it's essentially a death sentence at this time. So he goes on and kind of tries to live a fulfilling life towards the end of his lifespan, and he tries to kind of live wildly at first and then realizes that he should be using his position to try to make good, and makes it his life's mission as he's dying of cancer to build a park over what has kind of become like a bit of a cesspit of sorts, and this comes to fruition, and we kind of hear how this tale unfolds during his funeral. And I have to say, I loved the the kind of narrative and how the story unfolds. And I thought nothing lacked whatsoever, but the kind of the last third of this movie was absolutely amazing. What were your initial thoughts whenever you watched this one, Guillermo?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I have to give a big shout out to my boy Takashi Shimura, who essentially carries the whole film on his shoulders. And he's an actor who may not get mentioned in the same breath as Toshiro Mifune, but
Hmm.
he's every bit as talented. And his performance here is maybe more subtle and restrained
Hmm.
compared to other big time Kurosawa performances, but he shows such vulnerability and expressiveness in his eyes and his face and his outbursts of emotion that when I came back to this film after on a rewatch after what originally watching it a few years back, I realized that my feelings towards the this film hadn't not diminished one bit, and it's the ending, as you explained very greatly, it just hits you like a ton of bricks. And this is a man who has literally wasted his entire life buried under stacks of paper, and who eventually learns to live, which the original title is translated. Ikiru means to live, and he finds vindication in dedicating the remaining of his time to others. And I think one common criticism that I've come across this film, which I cannot say that I fully share, but I do understand where it comes from, is that Kurosawa was too much of a crowd pleaser for his own good, and he may be too on the nose with his themes. And at the end of the day, this boils down to personal preference then, rather than a real flaw. I don't know if you would agree, or would you say that it's a fair criticism of this film?
I can certainly see where they're coming from, but on the flip side of that, and maybe because it's so on the nose, I do find myself seeing truth in this. I think it's something that a lot of fans would be able to relate to, where you can kind of look at your life and say, like, I kind of wish there was more that I could do. I wish there was more, not only flavor but more meaning to my actions. So while it is a bit on the nose, it was nothing that kind of ever made me scoff, and it actually kind of brought me into the film more because I felt like I was, even as a young man, I felt like I was able to sympathize and kind of feel what the character is going through. And I don't know if you felt that at all either.
Yeah, certainly. And the one aspect that I think enhances the overall theme of death and life is the historic context of the film. And one scene that hit me and stood out for me on rewatch is these funny montage where we see Kanji, who's the main character, going back and forth between bureaucratic departments, trying to get the ball rolling on his playground, on his project, on his legacy, and he's tries to take it to one department, he's thrown to another, he goes back and forth, and he can't seem to get anything done, which pretty nicely underlines the overriding theme of the film that is basically boils down to this: bureaucracy is the real death. And by escaping that ceaseless pit of dehumanizing work culture that was his post-war Japan, Kanji is able to truly live out his dreams and find meaning, as you said, to his own life. And I think this theme of Western capitalism transposed in Japan is a theme that, when watching Kurosawa's own whole work, it's a theme that you can find. It ripples through the rest of his oeuvre. For example, Drunken Angels, Stray Dogs, even Scandal. So Ikiru for me is the best distillation of some of the biggest concerns of Kurosawa himself at that time, and also a society like Japan who was undergoing a big cultural crisis of identity. And I think it's pretty poignant to watch Kanji realize and trying to right his wrong with the little time he has spare.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good point, and it's definitely one of the aspects that makes Kurosawa so well. I love the word you used. You said distill, and he is tremendous at being able to kind of take these really big, important aspects of life and transform it into a film that is kind of able to really sum it up well and give a fully fleshed out perspective of these big overriding themes that kind of everyone has going on in their life. It's especially poignant for the Japanese culture, especially at this time. But I mean, what is it? It's 70 years later, and I think even you being from Spain, me from America, it's still, you know, it rings true and it makes you take a look at these big important themes again.
Right, right, right. And that goes back to our main theme of Kurosawa being a master of fleshing out those themes without giving out the impression that you're being manipulated into giving an emotional response. And don't get me wrong, this is a very emotional and very outward film, but within that framework, Kurosawa never tries to buy your uh, your grief. It never tries to manipulate you into caring about these characters, and he doesn't shy away from showing the ugly aspects of this man and the bad things that he had done. So he's an ambivalent character at first, and he's a pretty jerk around his workmates. But you you definitely at the end of the movie you truly realize you see the big picture and understand this man overall. And I think that he manages to make big introspective and big picture themes like death and capitalism and finding joy without feeling too didactic for my taste.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. It doesn't feel like he uses any cheap tricks whatsoever. Uh, not really any manipulation either, like you said. And what you brought up is a brilliant point that I really, really liked. And whenever a main character is only kind of painted black or white, it it feels manipulative and you almost can't fully appreciate that character, but for him to be able to give almost a realistic look at a person where you do get to see flaws and picadillos, it truly, like, that's when I can fully appreciate a character, and I'm so glad that he did that because you really find yourself cheering and loving the main character in this film.
Right, right. And I want to mention one another scene that that really caught me off guard the first time I watched it. It's I think it's around the midway through the first half when Kanji is going on a shopping and drinking spree in the middle of the on the heart of the city, and he enters this nightclub that is packed with young people and basically people from another generation as him. So he doesn't fit in at the slightest. And then he sings this love ballad in the bar, where Kurosawa
Mm.
just slowly zooms in into a harrowing close up of Shimuru's face. And you see him on the verge of tears, singing. And I think you could argue that that's a cry for help
Mm.
from Watanabe, who at that point of the film hadn't learned the true meaning and in his pursuit of happiness, and he tried to find it in artificial
Mhm.
objects and in little joys, but he doesn't truly find the meaning until he realizes that it's not by doing shopping or drinking sprees but finding vindication in his actions. And how can you help the other, that he truly realizes the what he hadn't learned until that point.
Oh man, you put that very very well. And to me, I mean, the film stands out from that kind of sequence that you mentioned, and then the relationship with the younger woman who worked in the office with Wantabe, and how that really he over the process of meeting and talking with her and truly getting to know her really opens his eyes to what you said, which was a way to find true meaning in his life. And it was kind of beautiful to see that all unravel, and then we get at the very end of, or not the absolute end, but very close to the end, the callback to where he's swinging on the swing set in the park that he helped, make come
Right.
to fruition, and he's singing the same song, but it seems like it's from the opposite perspective now, and that life is brief, but it's almost been fulfilled through what he has done.
Yeah, that's essentially like flips it on its head. First, he's crying and he's desperate to find meaning. And even in the later scene on the as he swings in the snow, he's staring right into the abyss, and he knows his time is numbered. And but he realizes that he's accomplished his goal and that he can truly rest in peace without any regrets, having accomplished that deed, that selfless deed. And the one thing that you mentioned earlier that I think we should mention is the way that Kurosawa structures this film, and he breaks it into two very different halves.
Mhm.
The first one is essentially the we see the kanji's actions firsthand, and in the second one, that is almost completely posthumous, we see every false assessment of the actions that we've seen unfold. And I think that's pretty great way to show that no matter if you get the credit of your actions, the true reward are the actions itself. I don't know if you saw it that way, or you mentioned that you liked the second half
Mhm.
more than the first one.
Yeah.
So,
First of all, I wonder if this was groundbreaking as far as the narrative structure goes, um, because my very early film knowledge doesn't go back super far, but to have it told, while he was alive and then posthumous, as you said, is super neat. I really loved the decision to go with that. And kind of harkening back to the song. life is brief, but if we take big and bold actions, it almost kind of allows us to live on even after we pass. And I feel like that was a super poignant and powerful message by telling it that way at the end.
Yeah, I could not have said it better. And yeah, I think Ikiro is a big outlier compared to Kurosawa's films at that point. Remember that by the time being, he was riding off the wings of success after basically breaking out with Rashomon. And one thing that I completely love about Kurosawa is that he didn't make one type of movie. I mean, he could
Mm,
have easily said, "Screw it! I'm a legend. I'm going to zero in and keep making samurai epics time and time again." Which again, he was second to none. So I wouldn't couldn't falter for him for doing that. But instead of settling for one type of film, he opted to branch out and gamble. And those gambles not always paid out, but he's kind of a Swiss Army knife as a filmmaker. He tackled hardboiled noir. He tackled morality plays. He made social commentary like High on Low, tear jerkers like Ikiru. And when you take a look back to many great directors that I do admire, but take for example Bergman,
mhm,
who made 50, 60 films throughout his career, but you're always going to bump into the same themes and
mhm,
overarching characters, the deafening silence of God, the nihilism, the dysfunctional families. The same goes to take Christopher Nolan
mhm.
or Woody Allen. But in that regard, Kurosawa, I think I admire the way he went out his way to redefine his himself throughout the years and to make film a deeply intimate character study like Ikiru after having your biggest commercial success in a period drama of samurais and in a span of 2 years. I think it's pretty underrated the amount of craft and the challenge of going going outside your comfort zone and pushing the envelope in every genre you ever dare to tackle.
Yeah, his versatility is possibly second to none, and the braveness and boldness to try to tackle something outside of what brought you to fame, I think, is why you can look back at his filmography and really appreciate him as one of the best to have ever done it. Guillermo, do you have any a final thoughts on Ikaru?
I think that this is a film that should be required viewing for
Mm,
any body and film buff who wants to try Kurosawa, although I might not recommend it as a complete newbie.
mhm.
I don't think if it should be viewed right off the bat. I think it benefits from having a bit of mileage, but it's a tearjerker. It earns every big moment, and that in an emotional film like this is the biggest praise that I can give.
Absolutely. What would you rate this film out of 5 or out of 10?
So, big disclaimer, I've grown disillusioned about ratings, but I do rated this film. So, I'm going to give it as it is. I I rated it a few years back, but I remember it giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. But
Okay.
that could definitely change in the near future.
So I gave this one 4.5 out of 5. I I think a rewatch could possibly bump it up for me. Um, I kind of see exactly where you're coming from as far as ratings go. They're so kind of subjective and in different genres. It's kind of hard to judge everything on the same scale, you know. So it's definitely become difficult for me. But I would agree with
Yeah,
you. It's a must
and it
watch.
is the thing about ratings that when they distract from the overall experience, it may be time to think things over. So, and I don't mind. I still rate some films, but Ikiru, 4 out of 5 doesn't give the full um, justice to a film like Ikiru. It's
Mhm.
bigger than that.
Yes. Now, let's move on to Seven Samurai. Guillermo, would you want to give a brief synopsis on this film?
Yes, I will. So, yeah, Seven Samurai takes place in 16th century Japan during a period of civil war and political upheaval, and where a large group of bandits threaten to return to a small village of farmers and steal all their crops at the end of the harvest season. And with no means of defending themselves, they set out to find honorable samurai that will join their cause and defend them from their imminent threat. And rewatching it, one particular quote stood out for me that I think nicely sums up the overlying theme of the film. This is said by Kanji, who is the Takashi Shimura's character,
Hmm.
and it goes, "This is the nature of war. You protect others to save yourself, but if you only think of yourself, you destroy yourself." And
Absolutely.
I, yeah, that's a quote for the ages, and I think it underlines the overall theme of strength in numbers and a group of people working for a common goal. And I know that looking back to this film, 70 years removed from its release, it's a pretty straightforward team building formula. We've been shoved down our throats for ages and essentially laid out the groundwork for uh, countless of films, including the Avengers. Even you can
Yeah.
trace that back to a film of this magnitude. And whenever I approach a film, a renowned classic of this stature, I always do with cautious skepticism. And one of my biggest fears is that it may feel dated or not truly stand the test of time when you've been ripped off so many times that there's a chance that it may not feel fresh anymore.
Mm.
Fortunately, that was far from being the case here. And I don't know if you agree, but for a 3.5 hour movie, it practically feels half its runtime.
I completely agree with you. When you had said that to me when we were talking about this film, you know, I was a bit skeptical because you see 3.5 hours and you're like, I mean, how can it not? But it rings so true. It really does. The pace is so beautiful. To be able to pace a movie this long and, like you said, make it feel as though like time stands still. It doesn't you're not watching the clock at all. You're kind of on the edge of your seat and find yourself so invested that it goes by at such a rapid pace. And that is probably for a movie of this length one of the best um, you know, kind of good things that you could say about it. It's so tight in its pace.
Yeah, definitely. And Kurosawa never tries to outsmart the audience. I mean, he knows what he's trying to do and he does it perfectly. But whenever you try to, I always try to compare a film like this to action films now. And I don't want to generalize, but I see virtually no wasted scenes here. Every big moment is earned,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, Seven Samurai is still to this day a textbook example of how to flesh out characters
Mm.
without bringing down the overall narrative. And the film ebb and flows uh, great. And I gotta say that watching this as a college freshman rocked my world, completely rocked my world.
It is absolutely amazing at that. I found myself invested in numerous characters because, like you said, it built up to these character uh, arcs and these moments for each character that didn't feel like it was just kind of thrown in there without any forethought. And that is when you're making a movie this big, this grand, to be able to do that, have the attention to detail to make sure we get the appropriate beats to really earn the payoff. That is something that is is nearly never accomplished anymore. Doing that is
And talk
such
about
a testament to Kurosawa.
and talk about hitting the landing. I mean,
Mm.
if you're going to make a 3.5 movie, you better knock yourself out with the ending. And Kurosawa knows that pretty damn well. And the final showdown is incredible. One of my favorite action sequences of all time.
Oh yes, all the battle. I mean, first I have to say his ability to have just a ton of people on the screen at once and be able to choreograph all of that is it's breathtaking, and you see that a lot in this film. Would you agree?
Yeah, everything flows so well, and the he knows how to make normal scenes, but he also knows how to uh, take a great scene and make it even better. And there's multiple camera setups. It never feels dull, and it definitely stands the test of time. I read upon rewatch that due to production delays, the whole rainstorm fight scene of the climax of the movie got pushed to the winter, and they what we're watching was actually filmed fighting in snow, and the it was an incredibly long production, which actually heightens the experience, knowing that they're pouring their souls into this big epic you're watching. Nothing is unearned, and for me, one thing that goes unnoticed that I have to go back are the introductions of the seven samurai.
Mm,
In special honorable mention to Kanbei, who is the Takashi Shimura's character,
mm,
who basically functions as the film main moral compass and this wise leader. And I don't I like to hear your thoughts on the whole scene where he disguises as a monk to free a kidnapped kid, and he cuts his top knot, which back in the time was a huge disgrace for any samurai to cut your top knot. And he goes and disguises as this monk, and he slashes the perpetrator, and instantly you know without any dialogue that this guy is the real deal.
hmm. Yeah, like you said, cutting the top knot was hugely significant during the time period that the film is set in, and I think it kind of illustrates how this character is not only attempting but succeeding in transcending what a samurai looks like, but actually taking the action to do what a samurai should do and have that moral compass to do the right thing no matter what the cost is, even if if it entails cutting off a piece of yourself to become that.
You get to the heart of the matter, and I think that theme is hammered afterwards, after the end of the big climax battle, where you see the remaining samurais and Kanbei, who is Shimura's character, um, wonders if they have actually won at all,
Mm,
because the actual winners are the villagers, but the remaining samurai have not earned anything, any monetary gain, have not earned any honor, and their selfless sacrifice echoes in some way to Ikiru message of selflessness and giving back to others and using your strength to protect others. And I think in that regard, when critics separate Kurosawa's samurai epics and post-war dramas, I think they're closer to each other than people may allow to. And
absolutely.
there's also this additional layer that I appreciate better upon rewatch, of class resentment and inequality that is embodied by Toshiro Mifune's character, who is, for the most part, is played for laughs and comic relief. But there's a incredible scene where the samurai find out hidden gear and pillage armor from straight samurai, and while they're staying in the village, and he throws a tantrum, um, going on about how the farmers are evil, and because of the samurai, and given the samurais horrible uh, treatment of the villagers, there's a vicious cycle of stealing and raping and ripping off each other during a time like this of war. And we eventually learned that he was born a farmer and basically stole a birth certificate to climb up the social hierarchy. And I think that ties in nicely with the theme that maybe samurai are not always honorable, and there are some odd ducks uh, around them too.
Yeah, I have to say, I thought Mifune's his performance was absolutely amazing, and there's so much to it. He feels like the most fleshed out character as far as I'm concerned, and his character arc is absolutely brilliant. Um, I feel like he stole the show on a comical note, but his emotional notes were also so they were very powerful because, like you said, he had that beginning where he was an orphaned farmer and then is able to kind of get to the opposite side of the spectrum and, poses as a samurai. But it seems like at the very end, he becomes and very much embodies the samurai spirit to where he is willing to give up um, his, mortal body to protect these people, and it really harkens to the point that it's like cooperation allows kind of both sides to flourish in one way or another. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My thoughts exactly. And there's there's this theme of good and evil where you can realize that the farmers have a little bit of resentment towards samurai, but they have no other option than to join forces and in order to survive. So this ties in nicely with there's a certain subplot with Shino, who is this village girl whose father fears she will easily be raped by samurai, and so he cuts her hair, and she basically goes undercover for 2/3 of the film until he falls in love with Katsuhiro. But this is a good representation of the ugly side of the other side of the coin when it comes to period pieces, which for the most part are nostalgic and heroic feats, and they underline the bravery of samurai, such as in this film. But there's
Mhm.
also a dark underbelly to this wild society where it's the survival of the fittest, and either you eat or be eaten, but there's no middle ground.
Yeah, to not shy away from that, uh, kind of give flashes or views of both sides of the coin is definitely used very well in this film, like you said, because the farmer like wants nothing more to do with the daughter after he finds out of her um, spending time with a samurai, and says that not only does he not think that the samurai will stay with her, but also thinks no one will want anything to do with her since she has been with the samurai. And it gives a really neat kind of insight to the thoughts of how farmers looked at samurais and samurai farmers of that time.
Right on, spot on. And I think if audiences want to watch a more nihilistic outlook of the folly of war, there's a great companion piece to Seven Samurai. And I don't want to get ahead because I'm going to mention it later on, but Ran takes this template of warriors, samurai, hierarchy, and offers you the flip side of the spectrum of being dishonorable, which maybe represents Kurosawa's development throughout the years. Maybe he grew tired of being this crowd pleaser, but overall, Seven Samurai is a pretty optimistic and upbeat film. Which, by the way, I don't think people give enough props to how outright funny it is at times. I
Hmm.
was surprised by its humor at times. I thought it was gold, including Mifuno, of course.
Yeah, he was a shining star as far as this movie goes. Guillermo, do you want to give any final thoughts and a rating on this movie?
So yes, I think it's hard to look past a film like Seven Samurai as the high water mark of Kurosawa's career and practically the summation of every theme and visual style that he'd been juggling throughout his career. And I think what this you can argue that Ran, Ikiru, or any other masterpiece of his is your favorite, but I think nobody can deny that this is his most important film overall.
Absolutely. Um, and this I think could be described as the magnum opus of Akira Kurosawa, and I think that statement alone says everything you need to know. If you like or respect any of his films, this becomes something that is such a cinematic masterpiece that you really should try to set time aside and watch this one. And I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and is now uh, one of my favorite movies. Absolutely.
Same. I gave it the 5 full stars and never thought twice about it.
That's what I like to hear. And talking about kind of like movie rankings, you have seen a large number of Kurosawa's filmography. and I wanted to highlight your top five. It was a tremendous suggestion, and I think the people watching this would definitely want to see what you rated. And, I've only seen six of his films now, but I added my top five as well, and I thought it would be pretty neat for you to go through your top five and,
Yeah.
why you have, one through five, where they are, and what you really liked about each film.
So when it comes to ranking guys like Kurosawa, whatever order you end up with, you can feel that you're doing a sacrilege. Like take Hidden Fortress, the film that basically created Star Wars. No biggie, I have it at 10. Joe Jimbo, the film that gave Clint Eastwood his whole career. Well, okay, I have it at seventh. So the sheer volume masterpiece that he churned out, I think it's only rivaled by Bergman and Scorsese. Those that come to mind right now. And obviously, when you make 30 films, some are bound to fall through the cracks.
Mhm.
But having watched all but five, I realized that my top five is actually pretty close to what I suspect is the overall consensus. So, kicking things off, I have Ikiru at five, probably the most emotional resonant, other than There's Urusala. At number four, I have Throne of Blood. I think this is the perfect entry point for those eager to dive into his work. It's a visual wonder and possibly my favorite Mifune performance, a completely off the rails, over the top, bonkers performance, and it is glorious to see. At number three, I have Ran, which for my money is Kurosawa's grand statement, one last rodeo before and he reimagined King Lear's story transposed in 16th century Japan, and every praise we've sung about Seven Samurai, I believe applies here too. And it's the type of movie that you just can't help but sit back in disbelief at the sheer fact that such thing exists. It's a huge accomplishment and should be viewed with the best and the biggest screen available. And this might seem something of a cop out, but I feel like it's splitting hairs at this point. So I'm going to put High on Low and Seven Samurai tied at the top two spots.
Mm,
And I think Seven Samurai, we've covered everything at this point, enough said. And High and Low, I know you're a huge fan too. And call me one day, I'll put it on top. Call me the next one, I'll have it at two. It doesn't mind. They're flawless masterpieces, all the same.
absolutely. Um, our lists are actually quite similar, which is pretty cool. Um, I'm with you. Number one and number two is Seven Samurai, High and Low. I think it just comes down to um, you might just preferences really, but I think they're both pretty much perfectly done. And for me, I give Seven Samurai just a hair on High and Low, but again, like you said, they're both absolutely brilliant. And if you want to watch Akira Kurosawa at his best, I think these are the best two examples. Three is the you know one of the ones that I have a different one than you, and I put Rashomon there, which I actually watched last night. I think it's another 5 out of 5. The narrative structure and how the story is told is just absolutely, I would imagine, groundbreaking for the time, and it made for a very compelling and interesting story. Number four,
Yeah, I can't argue.
oh, go ahead.
I can argue with, yeah, I was going to say that it's a good sign when you have so many masterpieces that everyone has a different order. That's a great sign of your consistent output. So Rashomon, I can't argue with Rashomon being on the top three. So groundbreaking, as you said. So definitely an earned place right there.
Absolutely. And yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. To have so many films that could take a spot 1 through 5, really, it truly speaks to the the greatness of your work. Uh Number 4, I put the movie that really truly inspired me to keep watching and seek out Akira Kurosawa films, and that is Yojimba. I think it's um it is kind of the western that inspired westerns, as you were saying, and really put Clint Eastwood on the map. But I think Mifune is just he's so good, and the gunslinger character is so well played too. It's just a movie that I find really easy to fall in love with. So Yojimba at 4, and then same as you, Ikiru at number 5. But all of them are absolutely amazing. And Ran is a film that I have not seen yet. I want to watch very badly. I think it's only available on Criterion. So, once I finally stop being such a stingy uh, person, I'll definitely go out of my way just to watch that film. And also, six, an honorable mention is one that you have as well, and that is Throne of Blood.
Yeah. So I think that having watched 25 films, the I realized that half of them have a definitely a chance of being in everyone's top five. And I do want to make a quick shout out to five films that whereas they may not be my necessarily my favorite overall, I do think that are ripe for reevaluation. So
Yeah,
first of all,
your top, your underrated
yeah,
Kurosawa films.
and Drunken Angel, which for my money is the first indisputable masterpiece that essentially laid out the groundwork for the rest of his career. Mifune has never looked cooler than this as a hot-headed gangster who suddenly sees his life turn upside down after being diagnosed with tuberculosis. Up next, Stray Dogs, where a rookie cop loses his gun on duty and has no choice but to roam through the busy Tokyo slums in order to retrieve it, and essentially provided a template for films like Lethal Weapon, Rush Hour, or Hot Fuzz. Up next, I have the Bad Sleep Well, that completely caught me off guard because this is Kurosawa at his most cynical, Hamlet loose adaptation that is Shakespearean at heart and Hitchcock in execution. Next up, I have Dreams, which, although Ran is generally cited as Kurosawa's swan song, this is actually Kurosawa's last great film. And basically, it's composed of from with fragmented chapters that draw inspiration from Kurosawa's own dreams. And this is like rediscovering color for the first time. Incredible. You could take any frame of this movie and find yourself a beautiful wallpaper. And last but not least, Dersu Usala, which feels like cheating as it won an Oscar Academy Award for Best Foreign Film. That's the level of consistent greatness we're dealing with here. And it's pretty much unlike any other Kurosawa film, an expedition throughout Russian tundra that probes themes of death, nature, industrialization. And I had the chance of watching this on the big screen, on a limited screening, and it's a sight to behold.
That's definitely awesome. If you guys watching have not watched these films, join me because I'm definitely going to seek these films out and watch them myself. All the synopsises sounded really, really amazing, and Kurosawa was so good that if something is by him and recommended, it's definitely something that you should put on the must watch list for sure.
Definitely. Start with Rando. That should be your number one on your watch list uh, for Kurosawa.
Most definitely. Let me just ask you just a I guess it's a preference question, and it might be difficult for you to answer regarding two of the most famous actors to work with Kurosawa. And I guess I want to see, because the way you spoke of Shimura kind of makes it seem like he is your favorite, whereas I feel like Mifune is and it might be because of the films I've watched so far. I mean, do you have a preference over the two, or do you find them almost equally as respected in your mind?
I feel like there's no good answer on this. This is like picking among your children. But I do think that Mifune is more theatrical and definitely more. He can easily steal the show
Mhm.
by his sheer presence, whereas Shimura is more subtle and restrained and may have more emotional range. And if I had to pick one, I'd probably end up with Mifune, basically because he was the anchor for the best period for Kurosawa. But if Shimura had been given the lead part for as much time as Mifune, perhaps the conversation would be different.
Mm, that's a really good point you make, and I think it also speaks to Kurosawa's, as an artist, his ability to attract and retain such talented artists and actors. I think is kind of a gold stamp on that. You're doing something right if great actors are clamoring to work with you and stay with you as a director.
Yeah, my only regret is that Mifune and Kurosawa had a big falling out near the after Red Beard, and Kurosawa never recovered from that and never had the same consistency and the same greatness as he had with Mifune. But that still made for a one of the greatest body of works in cinema. So um, maybe it's all for the best.
That's true. Um, I actually I did not know that about the falling out. Do you know what it was over?
I do know that the Kurosawa had a penchant for being very rude on set, and
Mm,
he was deemed. He had a nickname back then that was the dictator. So when two egos like Mifune and Kurosawa, it's not hard to think that they might have clashed on set. And Redbeard, which is also a very underrated film, and you should definitely check it out, was a allegedly it was a difficult production where they spent almost 2 years making it. So maybe that was a tipping point for Mifuna to start looking elsewhere, where he might have had more leeway to a more creative output. So and Kurosawa started to a downward spiral until he recovered by the 80s with Ran and Kagemusha. But that was a difficult period for both, and the breakout was pretty ugly, as I recall.
wow. So Guillermo, thank you so much for coming on here. I feel like we had a really, really great discussion. You brought so much to the table. We will certainly have to do this again if you have any availability. Would you have any closing thoughts on Kurosawa as a whole, or anything you would like to touch on before we wrap this one up?
I think that my final statement should be that if anyone hearing this is on the fence of starting his Kurosawa journey, please go ahead and do it. And it doesn't matter where you start, it matters most that you do begin. And there's no wrong answers, and I think if you break down the cultural barriers, he's an incredible filmmaker and one that has made my appreciation for Eastern cinema increase manifold. So I think it's been a pleasure, and I'm thankful for you giving me an excuse to watch a 3.5 movie in good conscience. I think it was long overdue. And yeah, thank you for having me. And here's to many more collabs in the future.
Absolutely. And also, eh, be sure to check out Guillermo's writing on Taste of Cinema and Fan Cred. Again, those are going to be linked down in the description. So check them out because for Guillermo, very well spoken, and I can testify to the fact that he is also a very tremendous, well thought out writer. You have a clear passion for cinema, Guillermo, and I hope that anyone who happens to stumble upon this video goes out and reads your articles because they're brilliant to say the least, and you are very talented. And again, there is passion behind what you're writing, and it's it's hard to find that to find someone who you can tell truly cares about what they're writing with how you know movie articles can very much be pushed to where it's like we need to cover this new movie, and I can tell that you really care about what you're writing about.
That is, you're making me blush, practically. And I'm very honored, and I appreciate the props, and I can't wait to discuss more great directors with you. So here's to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Guillermo. This was amazing, and thank you all for joining us on this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out Guillermo's work as well. It's been a pleasure. So thank you so much.